highlight some of what you have in your packet, and you could definitely read the rest. But very, very proud to have with us today Chief Diversity Officer, the first Chief Diversity Officer appointed by New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer. Carra Wallace is responsible for delivering innovative solutions to increase contract opportunities for minorities and women across New York City's agencies and the private sector. Her initial focus was developing and launching the Comptroller's transparent, easy to understand grading system for city agencies to measure their minority and women-owned business enterprises, their utilization in public contracts. She's worked with the Comptroller on corporate government teams, on supplier, workplace, and board diversity initiatives. You can read some more of the extensive work. I don't know how she finds time to do it all. She came from DASNY, D-A-S-N-Y, in 2008. She was the Executive Vice President at Telewares and the leading provider of telecommunications expense management services to the Fortune 1000. Her resume is extremely impressive, and I don't like to read what you can, but I did want to give you just those nuggets and then talk to you from the heart because I happen to know her. She is one of the most generous, one of the most warm and compassionate individuals when it comes to advocacy for those who have been underrepresented. And for our Comptroller to appoint her as the first Chief Diversity Officer spoke volumes of his own theme for his term in office to really lift up the work of women and minority-owned businesses, to put someone who he could trust, someone who not only had the academic credentials, but who had the community credentials to be able to really work with those and open up doors and opportunities that have not been afforded them in the past. She's on the board of the Eagle Academy Foundation, where she volunteers her time to help educating inner city young men. So that just shows you a little bit about the person that she is. But what I love about her most is that she's approachable, she's very passionate about her work, and we couldn't have a better representative for New York City in this role, advocating for opportunities for women like you who want to be in business, who want to compete with the money you heard Senator Sanders talk about earlier, those $40 billion. Where do we land? How do we present ourselves as eligible for such opportunities? So without further ado, please give her a warm welcome, Ms. Carra Wallace.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am so glad that I made it here. I got a little lost. GPS was a little wrong when you put that dash in between the 155 and 24. But I made it, thank God. As Stacy said, I am the Chief Diversity Officer for Comptroller Scott Stringer, and I bring greetings from him as he is out and about around the city today also. Does everybody in here know what the Comptroller's Office does? No. I didn't know when I first went over there. Let me just be real, because you kind of, Comptroller, he's there are three citywide elected positions: the mayor, the Comptroller, and the public advocate. And the Comptroller is somewhat similar to the CIO of a company or the chief financial officer of the company. And as you think of what he is responsible, he really is the chief auditor for this city. So when you look at the city, there's three areas that when I was hired, I decided to really look at I felt that we could have impact. And the first area is the area of the city agencies. New York City's agencies spend close to $18 billion a year. So that's everything from the Department of Ed buying paper clips, paper, to hiring lawyers, to accountants, to all of the city agencies across the board, just as you think about spending money on a lot of different things. Oh, I'm sorry. And so as you think about that spend, $18 billion, less than 4% of that It's going to minority and women-owned businesses. And as I told you, the comptroller is responsible for the economics of the city. He wants to see the city grow and flourish. So one interesting fact is that 70% of minorities are hired by minority-owned companies in this city. So if you think about it, if there's $18 billion of spend and less than 4% of that is going to minority-owned businesses, how are we going to employ all of the folks throughout all of the boroughs if we aren't doing more business as a city with these small businesses? So we felt that it was critical to focus on that and really shine the light on what's going on inside of the agencies. The agencies responsible for construction, the agencies responsible for housing, agencies responsible, police, fire department. How are they spending their money? And when we broke it down in the report that we put out last year, we saw that the results were dismal. And we decided to grade every agency and give them a letter grade like you see on the restaurants, and to really just shine the light on what was going on. And I have to tell you, we graded the city a D overall. Yeah, a D, because it was that bad. I mean, and most of us in the room are black. I gotta tell you, when you look at the spend with African Americans, only somewhere around $16 million of the billions going to African American businesses. So as you begin to think of that, Latinos did a little bit better, Asian Americans and women, were several hundred million, but it still isn't enough. So luckily, the mayor's office, Maya Wiley, who oversees all the MWBEs, they are really trying to put some good programs in place throughout all of the agencies to ensure that they spend more with minority and women-owned businesses. And for those of you, how many of you have a business in the room currently? A few of you nonprofits. For those of you thinking about creating your own business, consulting. Some of you could be translators for the DOE. There's so many opportunities to do business, but we have to make sure that you really do understand and know how to do it. When I started looking at the different areas that we spend, one example is the food that we buy. When you think about the DOE feeding 1.1 million children, it is the second largest food purchaser in the country behind the Army. So as you think about that, think about your kids' lunches. Who's supplying the bread that goes on the sandwiches, or who's baking that bread? Are there who are the farmers providing the vegetables for those lunches? Are there opportunities for us to do more business with the city? And there really are. And what we in government have to do is be better at communicating that with all of you and in our communities, so that we know where the opportunities are, and we really begin to have more entrepreneurship and more businesses that are supplying the city. The second area that I decided to focus on, as I told you, I learned more about the Comptroller's Office when I got there. The Comptroller is the chief fiduciary of all of the New York City employees' pension plans. Anybody know how much money that is? $160 billion that we are responsible for investing and making sure that it grows, and it's there for a lot of you who work for the city, that it's there when you retire. There's over 700,000 current and retired employees. So when you think about that $160 billion, that makes us the 4th largest investor in the country, 12th largest investor in the world. So we have a lot of power and position. We invest in over 3,500 U.S. companies. So when I started looking at that, you say, we're invested in Apple, one of the major shareholders, and Oracle and Abercrombie and Fitch, all of the major companies. And so when you started digging and looking and saying, who sits on their board? Do they have diversity? Are women like you that are, really have the skill set or could have the skill set on their boards helping them make decisions? Are, minorities on their board? Very important, because we want to know who's on their board, who's in the C-suite, who's making the decisions for these companies, because what we find is that those that have diversity make better decisions and actually have better results than the companies that don't. So as long-term investors, back in the day, and some of you are too young to remember this, when we wanted to divest from South Africa because of the apartheid and everything else, we could pull our money out very easily. Nowadays, because of the mutual funds and what we call passive investments, it's not as easy to divest. And so if you have a company that isn't doing the right thing, you can't just pull your money out. So what we say is, hey, we want to be at the seat. We want to have responsible people on the boards, in their C-suites, making the right decision. The other thing we said for these corporations as we started really looking at this is, what is their supplier diversity strategy? Again, as you think of the millions of dollars, take Staples, for example. We're an investor in that. Staples is one of the major vendors here in New York City. We buy a lot of paper, printers, everything, millions of dollars. Well, in talking to the president of the Women's Presidents Organization, she told me that Staples does not use one woman-owned business based in New York. Now, they're a good corporate citizen and they use a lot in Boston, but again, we care about New York. So as we are an investor in them, as well as, one of their biggest clients here in New York, we have to leverage that power and say, hey, we care, so that for you that have these small businesses and your friends and relatives, we can say, hey, Staples, we need you giving them business, doing business with them. Give them the opportunity to compete and be a supplier to you. And so as you think about that strategy, if we're doing the right thing at the city agencies and we get these corporations to do the right thing, then for these small businesses, they can grow and flourish and hire more people because they'll have a nice portfolio of public sector and private sector clients. So, again, as you look at the power of this office, we have to be smarter and utilize this power to leverage it for all of you so that our communities grow and scale and that we really do see the economics of the city move in the right direction. The third area that I like to focus on is the asset managers. Because as you think about the $160 billion, somebody has to make the decision on where we're going to invest this money. And so we have over 200 asset managers. And when myself and the comptroller got there, we started saying, what about them? What about these big banks? What does their diversity look like? Do they have minorities and women on their boards? Who's in their C-suite? Who's getting compensated? And so we just rolled out in May a big diversity initiative that we think will be game-changing, and actually we think other pension plans like that will follow us in this, in that we are going to make diversity part of the criteria when we decide on who gets to invest our monies. And so we are going to ask who's on their boards, who's in their C-suite, how are they paying their people, what are their supplier diversity programs. And again, we think this will change the game. We also, in this area, last year really did decide to focus on our emerging manager program, and we allocated another $1 billion to private equity and real estate. And emerging managers are diverse managers and those smaller firms that are starting up, that what we end up seeing a lot of times with these emerging managers is a lot better investment results. And we see, especially when we focus on the diverse managers, they're the ones that will go into the Bronx and find Startup Box or some of the new innovative companies that the big companies basically stay in Manhattan and don't get out as much. And so if we're really going to see changing dynamics in our community, it's really important for us to give those smaller emerging managers dollars and cents to invest. So we've made some good progress. Over $500 million we've put into minority managers' hands in the last year. Our overall portfolio, there's about $10 billion with minority-owned managers, but we continue to push that. And so we feel like if we can focus on all three of those areas, we can really affect change here in the city, but also be a leader around the country, because we really do want to see our communities do a lot better. And I have to tell you, I feel so blessed to be in this position because I grew up in LA, worked in the private sector, actually worked in telecommunications for a long time on the cable TV side and the telephone side. I was actually a field operations manager, ran the installers, technicians, climbed poles, and was really there. And it wasn't until I got to New York and my first foray here, a little bit of personal information. I got married late, divorced early in Dallas, and one of my former CEOs was asked to come to New York to lead Bloomberg's initiative when he built the New York City Leadership Academy, where we thought that we would really work with principals and ensure that they were great leaders of these schools. So in doing that work, I happened to meet David Banks, who was the founding principal of Eagle Academy for Young Men, as well as Paul Williams, who at the time was the 100 Black Men president. And so they had been talking about starting an all-boys school, and I got involved, was trying to help recruit the principal and everything, and we ultimately, David decided that this was his to do. And I have to tell you, it has been now 10 years. Of course, we have a school in every single borough, as well as Cory Booker asked us to open one in Newark. And we're educating over 2,500 boys now. Our original school up in the Bronx, we started as a high school, grades 9 through 12, and very quickly realized that that was too late to get the boys. So as we opened all the other schools, we started at 6th grade, and now they're, we grow them out 6 through 12. We're actually going to, our Bronx has graduated 5 classes, and this year the Brooklyn School will graduate its first class, and we're going to do it out at the graduation at my church, CCC, next week. So we're so proud of that. But the reason I bring that up is that how I got to this position in working with Paul Williams, who, like I said, at the time was the 100 Black Men president. He was actually asked by David Patterson, Governor David Patterson, to run the dormitory authority of the state of New York, DASNY. And so when Paul was appointed the first Black president of DASNY and the history of it and it was founded in 1940, he asked me to join him to help him in really a lot of the strategic initiatives. One of the things we absolutely would have loved to see Governor Patterson reelected, but that didn't happen. But Governor Cuomo came in and he liked what we had been doing. And when Paul brought me in, I was the first African-American female managing director at DASNY in the history of DASNY. And we started focusing on this minority and women-owned businesses and looking at, especially in the financial and professional services sector, why weren't we seeing the bankers, the minority-owned banks and others being able to lead some of the deals? DASNY actually is the largest issuer of tax-exempt bonds in the country, $7 billion a year. So when you look at the colleges and the hospitals are being built, the roads, highway, DASNY issues those bonds. And as you think of issuing bonds for billions of dollars, the fees associated with those bonds go to the bankers. And again, none of the minority bankers were getting to be senior leaders of those deals. So we started focusing on that, ended up really going through and looking at all the artificial barriers that existed for these companies, changed legislation, changed policy, and excuse me, within 2 years, we had gone from 4% to 28% utilization of these minority-owned firms. And that's what a little bit of focus can do. And so we had great success. In 2010, we passed the Diversification Act that really put this, MWBE programs on the map. And fast forward, so as Scott Stringer was running for office, he looked at the city, he saw what the state had been doing, what we had been doing at the state level, but he looked at the city and said, whoa, the city needs some help. And, and he and I started speaking, and ultimately he brought me on to his team. And I have to tell you, for those of you that haven't had a chance to meet the comptroller, Scott Stringer, he is a wonderful guy. I have been working for him for a year now, and I love his passion. This focus on diversity is one of his top priorities. In all of our deputy meetings, we're talking about it and strategizing around it. And I really do feel that for this city, this is a moment in time for minorities and women to really have the opportunity. We are really at the point where we are leveling the playing field in a way that gives opportunity that folks can come on. And what, my final thought that I'll leave you with, when you have these programs, a lot of people, or what we've seen in the past is folks will set up these programs and then they put these barriers and constraints on these programs so businesses, small businesses, stay small and they get crumbs and pieces of the pie. I have a philosophy that, what we need to do with these programs is the point of them is to level the playing field. And when we level the playing field, it means that we have the ability to open up the whole pie to everyone, not just put a little piece or a set aside, but you open the whole pie, let people come on that playing field, let them compete. And what we see over and over again, that these minority and women-owned businesses can compete, can excel, and I just feel that this is the moment that they can grow and watch. You guys watch. I believe that there will be a $100 billion minority-owned company, and they'll be run and led the way the majority firms have led. It's a new day and age. So thank you for having me.
Now, isn't she amazing?
Yes.
We can say it again.